It's the Sustainable Ministry Show. This is episode number 10, a post-Jerry Sandusky era. Well, hey, everybody. We are back one more time with the Sustainable Ministry Show. Excited to do this show today because it's our 10th episode. It's hard to believe that we have already done 10 and that this is that one. It's a big marker for us. In just a minute, we've got a few announcements that we want to share with you. But before we do that, let's introduce the folks that we've got together here today. Stephen, you want to go first? Tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're up to.
Yeah. So Stephen Ingram, I work at, I'm director of student ministries at a Methodist church in Birmingham, Alabama, called Canterbury United Methodist. I work with ministry architects as a lead consultant, and I write books as well as write a blog, organicstudentministry.com. So I'd love to see you there.
Excellent. Hey, Dave. Glad to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Where are you at now?
I am representing the Northeast now after living my whole life in the Southeast. Moved in August to join the staff at First Reformed Church of Pompton Plains, New Jersey. And I'm the director of youth and family ministries there, overseeing the youth ministry, also working with the children's minister in a partnership with her, and then doing some leadership across the church too. And work with ministry architects as a senior consultant. Been doing that since about 2008 and really love that work as well.
Excellent. We're excited to have you on board today. And last but not least, Annette Safstrom. Annette, you are in the South, aren't you?
I am in McKinney, Texas. So we're a little south, but Texas, we're our own thing. So nobody else will claim us too. So we'll just go with that. And I am doing some things in children's ministry. I am co-writing Sustainable Children's Ministry with Mark DeVries, and we're really moving forward on that project. We're talking about publishing, and so that should be done by the end of 2016. So I'm really excited about that.
That is awesome. We can't wait. We can't wait for that to come out and be released. Now, I'm sure you will be ready for that to come out too.
Yes, I will.
So a couple announcements. I know I've shared some of these with you guys, but the Google Play Store will soon have their own podcast stream, much like iTunes. And when that happens, the Sustainable Ministry Show will launch on Google Play Podcast Store as the podcast store launches. So I'm really excited about that and glad to see that got approved. So that's exciting. This spring, we've got a pretty big lineup of things happening. One, we've got a couple shows coming up that we're going to talk about conflict on church staff. We've got a few pastors who are going to join us for that conversation. We're excited to tell you, too, that we've got another episode with Mark DeVries and Kenda Dean from Princeton, who's going to join us and talk a little bit about hatchathons and what's going on in their world. And then last but not least, we are going to begin giving away some prizes as we go through various episodes. And the prize we have today, I'm going to tell you about it at the end, but I want you to know if you are watching or listening to this show in the first week, every single person who watches is going to win a prize. So just know that. We'll tell you about it at the end. But if you are watching or listening, you've got 1 week from today, so February 10th. You've got to respond by February 10th, and then there is a prize that will be waiting for you. So with all that said, we have entered a new year, 2016. And a lot of churches are evaluating policies and procedures within their ministries, within their structures. Our church just reevaluated the entire staff handbook and changed some policies, updated some things, those sort of pieces. But we also know some churches are evaluating their child and youth protection policies. And some may, at this point, be going, maybe we should have one of those. Right.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. So for the church, and I think I've seen a few who don't have a child or youth protection policy in place yet. For the churches that don't have one of those in place, where should they begin to get one set up and started? Where's the best place to go?
I would say start with the resource that you already have. If you belong to a denomination that has a central office, conference, presbytery, whatever, the vast majority of denominations have some kind of child protection guidance policy in that they can at least help you start out with. So start with that free resource to begin with and figure out what your denomination says about child. And it's not just child protection, it's child and adult safety.
Right.
It's just as much of a safety policy for your volunteers as well.
Yeah. And I would add to try to find a body in the church to take ownership of it early on. There has to be some accountability. There's going to be fees associated possibly with background checks and things. There often are. And so to have a body in the church that kind of owns this thing, and that can be a tough one because nobody wants to own it often. So, but somebody needs to, and sometimes it's the personnel committee at the church that ends up owning it because they're already background checking staff people. And so it's a natural addition to take responsibility for all background checks. But then also in some churches, it can be sort of property or trustees, whatever the name of the committee is, because they already do risk mitigation. They deal with liability already, policy writing sometimes. Anyway, I want to encourage children's workers and youth workers, pastors to seek a body at the church to kind of own that thing, to be the source of accountability, to provide some funding for the background check. One that talks to the lawyers so you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's a good move.
Well, and I would say, just to piggyback on what Dave said, talk to your lawyers and especially talk to your insurance company because they've got lots of say in what they're covering and what you should be doing to earn that coverage, basically. And if they think that you're doing something and you're not, then you're really not going to be covered. So I think that's another place that you need to start is with your insurance company.
Yeah, and a lot of times it is the staff person, if it's the youth person or the children's person, that will have to take the initial action on this to get it going if there's not something happening in the church already. And that's a big, important piece. But I like what you're saying, Dave, too, that find a body in the church to own it. Somebody different than that staff person, because the staff person then gets mixed up in the middle of creating the policy and maybe something that's convenient for them in the ministry as opposed to what may be best for the church.
Yeah, and we're talking about sustainability after all. I have seen in churches I've worked with where with a staff change came a negligence in terms of background checks and child protection. The new leader coming on board didn't have the same focus or passion on that issue, and it got dropped with a new staff person. So sometimes having a body in the church that lasts in between and beyond staff people, that carries the protection of the children and youth and adults of that church through, can be a good move just for in terms of sustainability of that policy and not having to restart with every new staff person that comes.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because a lot of churches will have policies in place and not always implementing all of them. And I think that's what we see more of than anything is children's ministry, youth ministry has this policy already all set up. It's got certain rules and regulations or guidelines to follow. And we follow some,
right?
But then not all. How do we respond to that?
I think that one of the biggest things we can do is emphasize the importance of it. That, I mean, it's not a fun conversation to have, but it only takes one incident to bring a church down. And we can have the policy all we want to, but if we're not implementing it, if as leaders we're not convinced how important that is, we're not going to uphold it, because it does make our job harder, because we have to be more careful about our volunteers. We have to be more diligent about locking doors. We have to be more careful about some details. But if we understand that there actually is an eternal win for having the right policy, if we're saying we want to grow our ministry, if we're those new people that come into our church, if they don't feel safe, they're not coming back. And then you lose a family that probably belonged in your church to start with, but they didn't feel safe because maybe they felt like anybody could pick up their baby from the nursery, or they saw kids running down the hallway, just doing whatever. So it's more than just a policy to lock us down. It's really to allow people to feel safe in our ministry.
I think that our approach to implementing it could actually be a celebration.
Mm.
To say to our church, hey, we're kicking off a new campaign because this is how much we love kids.
That's it.
Make it a celebration versus a new set of rules that have to be followed. Have a party at the training to celebrate how much we love our kids. I just think that there are a couple things that stop youth workers and children's workers from implementing it. One is they don't like the policy. They think it's too restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
I served in a denominational role for a while, and I would frequently get calls. Actually, one time the vice president of ministry architects called me up and asked me this. He said, Dave, is it possible to do ministry with this policy? How do I, every now and then you just have to get one-on-one with the kid and have a deep conversation, just the two of you. Is that possible with this policy? And I had to walk him through the fine points of the policy and help him find room within the restrictions of the policy, and even give himself permission to meet with kids in certain settings at certain times with certain people around, whatever it was. And the other thing is that there's this fear that the current volunteers are going to feel judged somehow by this new policy. They're like, I've been working with kids for 10 years and now they don't trust me or something. And that's just a perception, because ironically, in every church where they thought there would be a backlash, actually people were sort of expecting it and wondering why there weren't background checks. I've had people say, yeah, I was background checked for scouting. I volunteer at my kid's school and they background checked me there. I've been wondering why my church doesn't have any kind of a policy. We think they're going to be shocked, surprised, feel judged, criticized, whatever it is. And actually they're going, yeah, it's about time we do something, because everywhere else I volunteer with kids, we do that. Why not here?
Yeah. The other thing I would say to add on to that really is that, as the director of student ministries, director of children's ministries, for you to be in dialogue, especially if you don't have a policy in place, for you to be in constant dialogue with the people and with the policy, because you want to help folks who are writing the policy or getting ready to implement the policy. You want them to understand the day-to-day on the ground function of the ministry. And so you're going to have a policy, if you're in dialogue with those folks, you're going to have a policy that better fits the ministry, and that you feel comfortable working in because you know it inside and out. Don't be passive if your church is making policy decisions. Be very proactive in that, and you're going to see the day-to-day on the ground virtues of the ministry spelled out in that policy too.
Another thing I hear is, we know all of our people.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. We know all of our volunteers. We've known them. They've been teaching for years. And the problem with that, Bryant, as you and I've talked about in the past, is that this thing, when an adult chooses to prey on a child, it's not a stranger crime. And so to say to your church people, hey, it's not that we don't trust you, and we do know you, but we want to have a policy that applies to everyone, where we know we've done our very best to take care of our kids. It's not about you singling out anyone. It's just that we want to do the very best and have the same treatment of everyone, and we're not singling anybody out. And, to be honest, to have a policy and not implement it might just put your church in a worse position than not having a policy at all.
Right.
Because it's almost like saying we knew better and chose not to act, versus we just didn't know. It's a little scary.
Yeah, and the thing it speaks to so much is, like, your guests don't know everybody.
Right.
Your guests to the church, the visitors, they don't know these teachers, they don't know these adults, and they anticipate that background checks are being done. They're expecting, because of schools and all the news and things that have happened in other places, they're just expecting that it's safe. And if they come in and then find out that it's not that they're going to stir a whole mess up in the church, but they're probably not going to come back.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a different time. A lot of folks want to pretend like, the church should be this place of innocence and this place where we shouldn't have to have these kind of things. But it's just the world. It's the world we live in. We live in a post Jerry Sandusky era where you can't, there's no more culpable deniability in these things. You have to do everything in your power, because we love our kids that much. If someone wants to push back against it, we say, no, we love our kids too much not to do this. And that's your answer. That's your answer every time. We love our kids too much.
Well, Stephen, it goes back to something you had said in reference to the communications talk a while back too, is if somebody's really against being a part of the policy,
Right.
it's probably not somebody you want volunteering to start with.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So if they're like, I don't know about that background check.
That's right.
Well,
There's your
there's
first
probably
red
another
flag.
place for you to serve.
Yeah, one of the things that you're doing as you're training adults and screening adults, you're also educating your adults.
Right.
You're turning them into protectors alongside you. You're teaching them signs for what to look for, because you will have a new volunteer start from time to time, and you're educating everyone on what to look for. So you can approach the training from that angle, not so much, here's some things we don't want you to do, but here are some signs. You guys can be our eyes and ears. I know that this affected me very closely. A gentleman in our church, where I was a dad and a volunteer at the time, my son was in the program though at the time, was arrested one day on 20 counts of lewd and lascivious acts on children. And it happened. He was a volunteer. He'd been volunteering with our church for about 10 years. And all of it happened at work through his job. They ended up doing all the investigations, depositions, all the stuff, interviewing and everything. And our kids at our church were safe. I went canoeing with this guy 5 days before he was arrested on a father-son canoe trip. So he was around kids all the time. But because our policy was well known, our adults were well trained, it created an environment where it would have been difficult for him to prey upon our kids. And we were real glad after all that ugliness settled that we could say our kids were safe. Our policy, our adults know the rules. They enforce the rules. Our kids were protected. And that was a good thing.
Dave, that's such a good example. And there's one statistic, I think, that kind of shows that we put so much faith in our background checks and so much like, oh, we're all background checked. Well, only 1% of sex offenders are actually convicted. So for every one background check that comes back with that on there, there are 99 walking around who haven't been caught or convicted. So it's really on us to have a robust policy where everybody is the eyes and ears.
Mm-hmm. And Annette, you just brought up a really important point. That is that I have worked with churches that only do the background checks, and then there's no training of the volunteers. They just screen everyone. Now everyone is eligible to volunteer, but they've not been given boundaries to work within too. So yeah, it just occurred to me that some churches go halfway. It's not all or nothing. They go halfway and stop. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that Andrew Zersky talked about, I believe it was on our conversation with him a few weeks ago, but he talked about, especially in youth ministry, a lot of times when you get into that gray zone, whenever you get into that place where, a policy or is being violated, it's usually, or a lot of times it's not malicious. A lot of times you have a younger volunteer with an older student, and they might begin to have conversations that are, not fully inappropriate, but starting to border on that. And so he talked about a lot of times, especially in youth ministry with older youth, a lot of times it's an accidental thing. It is not something that you have, like Dave said, it's not a predator who's waiting at the doors of your church, to come in. A lot of times, these relationships are developed accidentally, and we got to be diligent on that as well.
So that prompts something for me. I wonder if we don't wrap this conversation up here, and then let's come back together and talk about some of those areas where it's just easy to kind of let the policy slide. I know with some churches it's check-in procedures for children. With youth ministry, sometimes it's things like you're describing, Stephen, or a thing on a trip or what have you, an adult taking a kid home. So let's spend some time talking about that in the next episode. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, let me tell you about the surprise, and I want to get y'all's reaction here as I announce it. Stephanie Caro has offered to do an online diagnostic for 100% of everybody who watches this episode, and then sends her an email sometime between February 3rd and February 10th. And all you have to write in the email is online diagnostic in the subject line. And then you're going to send that to Stephanie Caro's, which is Stephanie at ministryarchitects.com. And she does not care how many people it is. So everybody who's watched, everybody who's listened, send Stephanie an email with online diagnostic in the subject line, and you will get a free online diagnostic and an hour of coaching from her.
Sweet.
How awesome is that?
That is awesome.
That is Stephanie Caro.
Totally.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I shared with her that it could be about 100 people, and she was like, great. So, and if you've listened, feel free to send this episode to a friend. Let them know that they'll get an online diagnostic. And
Guys,
send
I would like
Stephanie
for
that
us to
email.
challenge our audience. I would love for us to challenge our audience to make it 1,000 people. We are going for 1,000 people to share this episode and send it to Stephanie Caro.
That's great. And I think it's safe to say there's enough people on our team that would pick up the extra gap if we were to get to 1,000.
That's right. It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
So as we close up, where can people follow up with you? Can they find you? Annette, how can people keep track with you?
Just find me on Facebook, follow me on Facebook. That's probably the best way, yeah.
All right. Dave?
Yeah, the same thing. It's Dave at ministryarchitects.com, and also David Sipple on Facebook, easy to find. Maybe start with Mark DeVries and look for his friends, and Annette's there, Stephen's there, I'm there. Just do that.
I'm hoping I'm there too. Stephen?
Yeah, come visit me over at organicstudentministry.com. All my information about speaking or consulting or any of that good stuff is on there, and you can follow me on there.
Hey, and I am Bryant Johnson. You can find me on Facebook. That's probably the easiest. Facebook.com/Bryant Johnson, or email me Bryant@ministryarchitects.com. And don't forget to subscribe through iTunes or YouTube. And as soon as we get the Google Play Store up, you'll be able to subscribe there too. We'd love to see you on Facebook as well. So if you look up the Ministry Architects page, feel free to like us there. And you'll get all the videos in your feed that way, or be able to hear about other things that are going on in our world. Hey, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Ha 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 ha!